minutes starts now.
You're muted, Sean. You're muted.
Sean?
He's working on it. There you go.
Yeah.
Okay, there you are. Okay. All right, go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, I don't think so because I live in Arkansas and I don't see a lot of racial inequality, you know, really anywhere. I mean, if I worked, you know, I've worked on a lot of construction companies and, you know, worked with mixed groups of people, and I don't see any really where the white guys will be in charge because they're the most white or anything like that. You know, I've heard about a lot of this kind of stuff in history, but I don't think any of it really applies to within the last 10, 20 years. You know. I mean, I've seen, you know, more, and anything I see that's more inequality, I think it says more about socioeconomic status than it says about race. So when you see, like, in LA, there's a lot of, like, police brutality, but they're not just picking on people that are of color, they're picking on more just people that are poor. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. I don't think that it's like I mean, I don't know how you judge power. That's what I kind of raised my hand to ask them, what is power? But if you're talking about money or what it is.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Sean. So next, is anyone interested in asking clarifying questions, starting with, I'd be curious to know? Just raise your hand. So Mark?
Okay, yeah. Kind of piggybacking on Sean, I would be curious to know if you think that this is a loaded question in that it leans more on classes of people rather than their merit.
Sorry, Mark, just thanks for that question. If you could, next time, if you could just start with, I'd be curious to know, just as a reminder for everybody.
Okay.
Thanks. Sean?
Yeah, that's kind of what I kind of think about the question, about the idea, is that the question is kind of loaded towards putting white people in their own class. And I don't see like a class of white people and a class of other races. Like, it's, you know, maybe within small groups, like, but I don't see in this country as a whole or in the world, there's not a class inequality based on race like there was historically. That's what I'm saying.
Okay, thanks. Mark, do you have a follow-up question? I'd be curious.
I do not.
Great, thank you. So did David drop? Okay. Jacqueline, I'd be curious to know.
Sean, I'd be curious to know, if you do not see a difference in racial and gender equality, can you explain to me why my company is headed up by a bunch of old white men?
I mean, your company might have, I mean, I think it's more of a correlation because they didn't say it's not part of the interviewing process for being a head of your company, is my assumption. They don't say, do you have a bachelor's degree? Do you have 15 years of experience in this company? Are you a white man? That just doesn't happen anymore. So I'm sure that there are white men that are in positions of power, but a lot of the time I would think that if you're of any, I know people that own companies that are black. I don't know a lot of people that own companies that are Asian. It's not something that holds everybody back.
Thanks, Sean. Is there a follow-up question, Jacqueline? I'd be curious to know.
Yes, Sean, I'd be curious to know, so we are an international organization head up by white men. How would people of different gender and different race feel inclusion within my organization if there's not someone that looks like them in a leadership role?
I mean, to me, that, like what you're saying, like if my boss isn't a white woman, or if you were whatever you were, looks like me or whatever, just saying it because my boss is not this that looks like me, I don't feel included in the company. Like, I mean, it sounds a little bit like you're the one being judgmental of your own company, but I don't know. It's just kind of ridiculous question.
Okay, thanks, Sean. Thanks, Jacqueline. David?
Are you talking about me?
Did you have your hand up?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah. I just start with, I'd be curious to know.
Okay, yeah, I'd be curious to know if you think that it's not a problem anymore, does that mean that, like, for example, in meetings where there's many different people, men and women and white men and people of different races and a diverse group of people, it seems that would imply that the white men in the group don't tend to assume that they get a larger chunk of the time to talk, and that they don't talk over other people and cut people off just because they're not, white men.
Hey, Dave?
Yeah.
I'm so sorry to cut you off. If you can just try to be a little more concise. So I'd be curious to know, and then.
I'd be curious to know whether you think that white men still do that in meetings, and if so, does that really agree with what you're saying about the fact that that's not a problem anymore?
Awesome, man. Thanks.
I don't know if you're talking about like etiquette, like people aren't giving enough time to people who are talking. I mean, it might be a cultural thing, the way that people talk, which I'm sure is, a real thing, that different people of different cultures have a conversation in a different way. So, I mean, I guess that could be, that could be something.
Okay, thanks, Sean. Dave, did you have a follow-up question? I'd be curious to know. Or did I already ask you?
No, yeah, I'll ask a follow-up real quick. Yeah, I'd be curious to know, specifically, as an example of this, whether you think it's no longer a problem, what a lot of women and other people think is a problem, which is that if they say something in a meeting or come up with an idea, then a white man will immediately then talk over them and grab the microphone from them and often adopt their idea and pretend that it didn't even come from them. Do you think that happens anymore?
Oh, okay, great, thanks. So if I could just clarify that. So you're saying I'd be curious to know if that continues to happen.
Yeah, that's something that's been claimed as a problem. And if he says there's not a problem, then is that true that implies that?
Great, thanks.
So you're saying, so if the question is, will someone claim an idea as their own? Me personally, I work in a lot of different, mixed groups. And so I've been in that exact situation where my boss was Latino and, stole my idea for, what it was we were hanging tile on these new homes and somebody was using the wrong color for spec. Anyway, people of different races do the same thing, and you're just talking about something rude that somebody does, maybe in a managerial spot, but there's managers,
Thank you, Sean. Thanks, Dave. And last clarifying question, Elizabeth?
Hi, yeah. I'd be curious to know what changed to achieve this equality.
I think a lot of it would have had to do with the historical, what was all that, like the equality movements and all this, and then just time, and probably like in the early days of this country, there was a lot of money coming over with white people. And so now it's kind of spread around. Everybody's been having a chance and they've all been working. So I think the accumulation of money has been given a chance to spread around, and different people moving here from different places in the world,
Thanks, Sean. Appreciate your helper with you too. Elizabeth, do you have a follow-up question? I'd be curious to know.
Nope.
Okay, great, thanks. I think there was one last person. Johnny, did you have a clarifying question? I'd be curious to know.
I'd be curious to know if you believe that individual merit is the way to interpret and judge people rather than racial classifications. The character and personality of a person is more important than racial classifications.
Thanks, Johnny.
I guess so. I mean, I really don't see people's racially classifying really much. Like I can't think of an example of where someone was classified on their race, and so that gave them you know, the only thing I can really think of is like that's really a positive thing. Like if somebody, you know, like a black president, you know what I'm saying? So.
All right, thanks, Sean. Johnny, did you have a follow-up question? I'd be curious to know.
I'd be curious to know if you've been aware of white men who don't have power.
Good question, thanks.
Yeah, a lot of white men don't have power. I mean, I don't really have a lot of power. I'm like mostly blue collar. I mean, you know, there's a lot of white men who and I listen to this history podcast. Can't think of the name of them right now. It's anyway, but they talk a lot about or they've talked about before in history that white men who've been in trouble or are poor and from poor backgrounds used to kind of match up with, you know, the black people and the workers, and they would be put to the blue collar jobs. And so that's kind of been something for hundreds of
Okay, great. Thanks, Sean.